Hey, Kelly Stacks here, American Irrigator, trying to make you a better irrigator. I want to welcome everybody to our podcast, Creating Better Irrigators, where we talk about all the tips and tricks of the trade, and just from my experience and things I've learned, and not only from my experience, but also from the education that I've had in the irrigation industry. I'm on the road today, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk to you. But I'm on the road, so you might have some road noise. And I know the video quality for the stuff we're going to put on YouTube is not going to be good. So I apologize about that. But I didn't want it to stop me from sharing with you the things that are on my mind today. This episode, we're going to talk about some of the advice that I saw on a YouTube channel from a guy that was giving some sprinkler advice, and I'm going to talk about why it wasn't good advice. Then I'm going to talk to you about how you really need to think about what he was talking about and really a better way to approach it. So it's going to be kind of a two-part deal today. I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. So I was watching some YouTube videos and just different things, and one popped up, and it was a guy that said sprinkler adjustments that you need to know, and then he put in the thumbnail and also in the title, secrets. He put the word secrets in there. And so, very enticing, and actually pretty good fun thumbnail. The video was actually not too bad just for video quality and the way that he did it, but that's not the part I'm talking about. The part I'm going to talk to you about today is the advice he gave. Now, I think it was good that he brought up this topic, sprinkler adjustments you need to know, you need to make, because that is true. Sprinkler systems aren't something that you just set and you forget about it and you just never come back to them again. There's a thing called maintenance on a sprinkler system, sprinkler maintenance. Guys do it all the time, but there's something you need to do and you need to take care of. They're not something you just forget about. You need to watch them. You need to make sure things are adjusted right. If sometimes things get out of adjustment and sometimes you need to fine tune them a little bit. If there's a rotor head that gets turned or wasn't adjusted right in the first place, it could be spraying a sidewalk or a driveway. Well, all the water going on those hard surfaces is basically runoff, and you're wasting water there. And we don't want to waste water because we don't want to waste our precious resource, but also you want to be smart at how you use that water. You want that water going on your landscaping to keep your grass and your trees and shrubs and everything else looking good. And so that's the main purpose of a sprinkler system anyway. You need to know some adjustment things, and even if it's just that you know that sprinkler systems need to be maintained and sprinkler systems need to be adjusted from time to time, that's a good thing to know and good thing to keep in mind. Now, if you're a DIY homeowner that wants to do that, man, that's great. You can watch some really good YouTube videos. We put out some videos about some things like that, and we've got tons and tons more stuff that we're gonna put out, and so I'm excited about what the future has to hold there. And we're gonna keep doing podcasts talking about this kind of stuff. If you like to do those things yourself, you can do it. You can learn it. Try to research and do as much of that kind of research and education that you can find and do on your own. You can learn how to do it. But also, I think it's always good to have a licensed professional, like a licensed irrigator or even a licensed technician that knows this stuff that you can call and ask advice from. Most guys don't mind giving advice over the phone without charging you. I know there's some guys that they want to be charged for every little bit of knowledge that they've got and that they give. And that's okay. We've spent countless hours of education, of trial and error, of all kinds of things trying to figure out how to be a professional at irrigation. And so that's worth something. It's worth something to the irrigator, but it's also worth something to a homeowner to be able to hire somebody who knows exactly what they're doing. So it works good both ways. Even if it's calling a professional to come out one time, walk you through everything, and then you want to take it from there, hey, that's great. I'm okay with that. Sometimes in the long run, it actually probably will save you money if you just hire somebody. I will say that, little side note there. But also you can learn it and don't be afraid to do it. That's good. We need to know that, and that's one of the things this guy was talking about. He showed you how to adjust a rotor head, and he showed you how to do it. And the first things he showed was you can, on a rotor, with the set screw that holds the nozzle in, you can screw it down. It actually will change the distance that water travels. And so when you need to back one off or tone it down a little bit, if it's spraying too far, you can kind of fan that out and it doesn't spray as far, like if hitting a sidewalk or a driveway. That's a good thing to know. So I'm okay with that. But it's this next point and advice that he gave that really is not good advice. One of the other tricks and secrets and sprinkler adjustments that he was talking about was that if you need more water in an area, all you've got to do is change this nozzle to a bigger nozzle, and now it's going to spray more water and your grass is going to be greener right there. In theory, mind you, theory, that works. That's great. And a lot of times, I've thought about this. So a lot of times you could do that and you could get away with it and it'd be just fine. Now, one thing I will say, he showed you how to do it, change the nozzle on a rotor head. And that was good. I'm fine with that. And the way he did it, or the number he picked, he had a 0.5 nozzle number on the nozzle, which is spraying half a gallon a minute, 0.5 gallons a minute. And he changed it to a 1. So we're talking about half of a gallon a minute change that he made to that sprinkler system. So is that going to break the system? Is that going to really change things so much where nothing will work? I would pretty much say no. It's not going to make that big of a difference. So you can do those kinds of things, little small increment type stuff. I might be okay with if you know a little bit more about what you're doing and actually what's going on in that sprinkler system. I'm okay with some of that. The problem I have with that advice is what people are most likely going to think is that, I can change the nozzle out, and they've got a nozzle tree that has all these different numbers on them. Well, what they're going to do, they're either going to go down that nozzle tree and just put them randomly in places, which is not good, or they're going to pick the biggest one because I want more water. Obviously, I need to have a bigger hole in that nozzle. And so they'll change out a 0.5 that has a small hole, only putting out half a gallon a minute. They'll change it to a 5, a 6, maybe even an 8 or 10, depending on what kind of head they have and what nozzles they have. Now you're talking about really screwing things up. And I've seen tons of systems that have this problem, that have people have put the wrong nozzles in rotor zones and the system not work right. Now, if it's done that way in the beginning, that's the contractor's fault and the guy's putting it in. But now, if you're going back to one later, if you're a contractor or a homeowner and you go changing the nozzles in that system to bigger, now if you tone it down, it's a little bit different. We'll talk about that here in a second. But if you're going to go put bigger nozzles, and what I mean by bigger is you're going to flow more gallons per minute, you don't really know exactly how that system was piped unless you were there, unless you were the one that did it. So if it's an older home, there's really, and unless you're going to dig that system up and figure out exactly the size of pipes and how they laid it out and everything, and you know that part of it, the schematic of it, unless you know that, you don't need to be changing a whole lot of things. The reason is because you don't know how that thing was piped and it was plumbed in and what they were trying to do in the first place. Because this is what happens is when you're designing, you design those rotor heads to have certain sizes of nozzles. And then what you do, you figure out how many gallons you're going to flow per minute, and then you pipe the system accordingly. And so, there's only certain amount of gallons you want to move through different sizes of pipes. So like a 3/4, and the thing you need to know is you don't want water moving through the pipe faster than 5 feet per second. So these are things that I've learned through education. Something that I'm telling you right now, not to be super critical of this person, but they do not know that. They don't have the education, they don't have the background, they don't have the experience to be giving these types of tips. This video, little side note again, this video had over 100,000 views on it. So there's 100,000 people have watched this and could be potentially really screwing up their sprinkler systems. Okay, back to my piping thing. So if you're gonna only move water through the pipe at 5 feet per second and you have a 3/4 piece of pipe, you're going to be around 8, 9, 10 gallons a minute is as much that you want to be flowing through that 3/4 piece of pipe. Okay, changing it half a gallon is not going to make much of a difference from what was there probably. But say they had 3 heads on the end of that system, the end of that zone, and you went and changed all of them by 1 or 2 or 3 gallons a minute. Now you started to really affect that system. And if you change it even more, what's going to happen is that entire zone is not going to work, either at all or barely. And so what happens is this: if you try to flow too many gallons per minute through a zone or part of a sprinkler system that is not designed or piped to run that many gallons, what's going to happen is you're trying to flow too much, and if the source won't produce it, then the heads won't pop up at all. Or what might happen is the first 2 or 3 might pop up, but the 2 or 3 after it might not pop up, or they might not flow. There's just a little bitty stream coming out of the very last head. Because what happens when the faster you move that water through a pipe, so if you exceed 5 feet per second, say you go up to 10, that's the velocity. That increases the velocity. When you increase the velocity, you also increase the friction loss. And these are a lot of different terms. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm just going to mention them to you. We'll talk about this stuff in further episodes, more episodes. But when you increase the friction loss, that means your pressure, your PSI. When you decrease your PSI, then your pressure's down, is what happens. That's the pressure behind it. Well, a rotor head typically takes 40 PSI to even pop it up. That's what the springs inside of them are rated at. So if you decrease your PSI because of the velocity increase and your friction loss increase, that was what causes your head not to pop up. Now, how did all that increase? Is because you started trying to flow too much water through that. So you see, it's a compounding thing here. I went to a system one time that this exact thing had gone on. They had, and I talked about it in another episode, but they had all these rotors that had different sizes of nozzles in them. Well, they were trying to flow too much water through there. They had the wrong size of nozzles that were flowing the wrong gallons per minute. So it didn't work. And the ones that did pop up, they had just a little bit of stream, little bitty stream coming out of it. And the grass looked terrible. So what we did is we went in, we figured out what that system will do. It was on a well. We knew we could go 15 to maybe 20 gallons a minute is what he said. But on a well, I always back it way down. Because especially, unless it's a dedicated well for the irrigation system, most of the time you've got a well that's feeding the sprinkler system and a house. And so if your sprinkler system's on, somebody's running the washer, taking a shower and all that, now we're affecting all of that altogether. So you want to leave room for that well to be able to produce and service water for other things. So we went and we backed it way down to where that zone was only spraying about 10 gallons a minute. Well, let me tell you, you think, oh, well, you just cut it in half, the water you're putting out there. Well, that's just at one time. That zone has never looked that good, he said. The sprinkler heads all popped up, had all good, equal amount of pressure to every one of them, and we matched the precipitation rates on where those those heads were placed. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second. So it worked, and it went great. Well, they were trying to it was like 30 gallons a minute. It was all you need to do when we backed it down. So now to get that same amount of water, or really get the right amount of water, now we mess with the run times to fit what we have in there. And that's going to put the right amount of water down, and the system actually works. The heads were spraying as far as they needed to spray. It had a good fanned out stream, that the way those things were designed. Now this thing is working, man. It looked great. He was happy. We were happy. Everybody's happy. So that's if you go messing with those nozzle sizes, it's not a good idea. You could screw up the entire system. So I would not recommend just anybody going in there and changing the nozzle. If you notice an area in your house that's not getting enough water, don't just go put random stuff in there. What I recommend is you hire a professional who knows something about velocity of water, knows something about gallons per minute, knows something about PSI, somebody that knows something about designing and installing a sprinkler system. Those are the kind of people you need to be working on this sprinkler system, on your sprinkler system, is someone who's got the education and experience to do that. So that's what I, number one, would recommend on top of watching a YouTube video and following someone's advice who really do not know what they're talking about. Now, this guy had some other good points. He had some good points in this video, and then he had some other good things about how to keep a good looking yard. It's a DIY type channel, and so he had some other good stuff. So I'm not totally dogging this guy. I want to caution everybody about listening to all the advice and the things you see in YouTube videos. Now, we have a YouTube channel, and I try to put out tricks and tips and different things, and I've got a long list of future videos that are going to end up coming out. Now, I'm not saying that I'm so much better than this guy, but I will say this: the tips and tricks that we use and come from that education, come from that experience in the irrigation industry, and from a long background in landscaping and maintenance. And so there's a lot that comes behind the knowledge and the things that we talk about. So, I say that if you watch our YouTube videos, that's where it's coming from. And so I feel like you can be confident about following some of the tips that we have. Now, we'll say this too. The tips that I give are really sometimes specific to the area that I'm in. So some of the things that we talk about and the ways that we do things aren't the ways that other people do them across the country or even across the state. We're in Texas. And Texas is a big old state. And we've got different climates over the entire state, and we've got different soil types. I mean, it's sometimes it's crazy to think about the differences between North Texas, the Panhandle, West Texas, South Texas, East Texas. I mean, we've got all those different areas, and people and licensed irrigators do things a little bit different to those areas. And so when you're watching our YouTube videos, we're out in West Texas. And so the things that we talk about are really going to work in West Texas really good. Now, I think you can use that advice in other areas, but I will say this: it might not work in your area. And so you could end up doing a podcast talking about the exact same thing that I'm talking about, saying, man, this guy's giving terrible advice. It didn't work in my area. So this is my full disclaimer right here. The things we talk about might not work in your area. But the things we do talk about, we talk about because we know what we're talking about. And I can say that confidently. And I believe that we are professionals in our industry. I know there's guys that know more than me, and I know there's guys that are better than me. And when I get around one of those guys, I don't try to puff up and try to be better. What I do is I try to learn from them. Because if I can learn more, that's going to make me better of what I do, better about what I do. And so, last point I'm going to make, and this is a design tip when it comes to designing a rotor zone. And we're going to do some other educational stuff on this because I think it's very important, and I think that there's not very many people who follow this for sure, but I'm afraid there's not very many people that know this. When you're designing a rotor zone, to match the precipitation throughout that zone. Now, if it's all 360s, they're all turning 360s. But now when you're on the side and you have maybe two 180s and you have two 90s, what's happening is that rotor in a 180 is starting at point A, goes around to point B, and then it starts going back to point A. Same thing with a 90. But just simple math, 90 is half of 180. So that 90-degree angle, the rotor adjusted to only 90 degrees in a corner, is going to make 2 passes in that area versus the 1 pass in the 180. Does it make sense? Are you following me? 180 is going to go point A to point B. Now a 90 is going to go point A to point B, back to point A, back to point B. It's going to make 2 passes because it takes half as long to make that pass. You see what I'm saying? So from point A to point B is half as long as it from a 90 to a 180. Same thing to a 360. If you have a 360 on a zone with 180s and 90s, now a 360 is going to go around 1 time, 180 is going to go 2 times, and a 90 is going to go 4 times. Simple math, not a genius level type stuff. But when you're designing that, you need to put the type of nozzle, those number of nozzle that's going to match those types of rotations. So let's do simple math here. If we want a number 4 nozzle that's going to spray 4 gallons a minute in a 360, and we know that a 180 is half a 360, what you want to do is you want to put a number 2 in a 180. So if they're facing each other, now you're putting down the same amount of water. Well, how's that? You're only flowing half as many gallons. Right. Half as many gallons, but it's running through twice when that 360 is just going around 1 time. Now you're putting you're matching the precipitation. You're putting the same amount of water in that area. Now go over to the corner and you've got a 90. Now you need to take half of that 180 or a quarter of the 360. So you're going to want to put a number 1 nozzle in that corner. Now you've matched all the precipitation in all of your nozzles in that area. If you're in square spacing, then this is going to work great. That's how you design a rotor zone and how you pick the right nozzle to put in there. So when you guys are changing that later, yeah, you have the potential of really messing that whole thing up. So no, my next advice on a rotor zone is, if it's possible, put all your 360s on the same zone and then do your ones on the edge, your 90s and your 180s on a different zone. So on big systems, it's easy to do that because you've got enough heads. Now on a smaller system, without putting 400 valves in place, you might have to put some of them together, and that's okay. Just put the right nozzles in to match so it's all water in the same. Because what happens is if you put the same nozzle in all of them, and I see designs like this all the time, and I just don't understand how they don't know this, for one, but why they're not designing these things right in the first place. And I'm talking about big time architectural firms that are putting out, plans on buildings and houses, and they've got an irrigator that's designing this stuff, and he puts the same nozzle in all of them. I don't understand that, because that's not the way you need to do it. So if you get one of these plans and you're doing a bid on it, oh man, you better go through every single zone, every single place, and you better redesign it and then bid according to your redesign. Or make sure you have plenty of notes in your bid, and so then that when you need to make a change order, you've got proof that this was not in our bid. So there's a lot of tricks to that kind of stuff. That's a whole nother episode right there. So if you can break your 360s out, do that and keep them all separate. Then you can also do different run times with your 360s and your 180s. You can split it out that way. That is really the best way to do it. It works great, and you've got some flexibility to really keep that part of the yard looking great. Well, that's about all I have for today. So I'm glad you guys are here, and I welcome you back. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and here on this podcast, Creating Better Irrigators. And we're on several different podcast platforms. So I want to find us on any of them. We're on Google. We're on here on this Anchor, and that's what I like to use. I think they're great. And we're on several others, and I'll keep mentioning that kind of stuff as we go along. Have a good day.